Quentin Tarantino reveals the 7 actors who are actually evil. Hollywood runs on myth. Every generation needs its villains, but the most dangerous ones rarely play them on screen. They smile for the cameras, sign autographs for adoring fans, and thank the Academy before heading back to a reality darker than any film they've made. Quentin Tarantino has built his career dissecting those masks, turning cinematic violence into moral autopsy. But in private, and sometimes on record, he's hinted at names. Actors who, in his words, didn't just play evil, they carried it. From late-night anecdotes to unguarded interviews, Tarantino's admiration for performance is matched only by his contempt for hypocrisy. He studies actors like crime scenes, looking for motive, method, and the fracture between role and reality. What does evil mean to a man who's filmed it better than almost anyone alive? Is it cruelty, manipulation, or something colder, the absence of remorse? In a town where everyone performs, Tarantino claims a few never stopped performing. The charm was armor, the darkness was real. And today, we're stepping into his vault of confessions. 7 actors Quentin Tarantino believes aren't just villains on screen, but in spirit. The ones whose stories, when told off record, sound less like gossip and more like evidence. Harvey Weinstein, the producer who turned power into terror.
Judi Dench unbuckles her pants, and on her bum, as you say,
Yes?
JD loves HW. A tattoo.
Before we even reach the actors, Tarantino's reckoning begins with the man who made his rise possible and poisoned it. Harvey Weinstein, co-founder of Miramax, financed Tarantino's earliest films, from Reservoir Dogs to Pulp Fiction. But when the truth about Weinstein's abuses surfaced, Tarantino didn't feign surprise. He admitted he knew enough to have done more. That confession haunts every frame of his later work. In Tarantino's moral universe, Weinstein isn't a monster of rumor. He's the industry's reflection, the man who treated fear as a management style, humiliation as currency, and talent as property. Weinstein's influence defined Hollywood in the 1990s. His blessing made careers, his temper ended them. For a young director like Tarantino, that power was both protection and poison. He's since called it living inside a contradiction, telling stories of rebellion while answering to a tyrant who dictated every move and controlled every door that opened. I knew enough to do more than I did. To Tarantino, Weinstein's evil wasn't cinematic, it was bureaucratic. It thrived in contracts, parties, and silence. His cruelty wasn't creative, it was administrative. The director who filmed Revenge realized too late that justice off-screen requires courage, not dialogue. When the scandal broke, Tarantino didn't deny his part in the ecosystem. He faced it. Friends say he changed afterward. Sets became warmer, boundaries clearer, hierarchies thinner. The lesson stuck. Silence is the villain's favorite co-writer. It taught him that real monsters don't chase victims through hallways. They sign their paychecks and smile for the cameras. For Tarantino, Weinstein remains proof that evil doesn't wear horns. It wears a tuxedo, shakes your hand, and tells you you're lucky to be here. Kevin Spacey, the performer who couldn't stop performing.
And so, New Line Cinema told me to go fuck myself.
Tarantino has often said the scariest villains are those who think they're innocent. Few embody that more than Kevin Spacey. Charismatic, controlled, endlessly calculating. Spacey was the kind of actor Tarantino admired on screen but distrusted in life. Colleagues have described Spacey's sets as psychological mazes, where fear replaced direction. Tarantino once remarked that Spacey always looked like he was playing poker with your soul. Behind the craft was something colder, a hunger for dominance dressed as genius. To Tarantino, Spacey represented a specific kind of evil, the one that hides in professionalism. The man who plays mentors and masterminds so convincingly that people forget their roles. When accusations against Spacey emerged, they didn't shock Tarantino. They confirmed something he'd long suspected, that Spacey's control wasn't a technique, it was an instinct. Every conversation, every pause was strategy. He didn't act emotion, he engineered it. He never stopped performing, even when no one was watching. Tarantino has said he admires actors who bleed for the story, but only within the bounds of honesty. Spacey blurred those bounds until truth and manipulation became the same gesture. Former collaborators described him as magnetic yet menacing, a presence that filled the room and emptied it of safety. The genius was real, but so was the cruelty. What fascinated Tarantino wasn't the scandal, it was the psychology. How a performer so brilliant could see empathy as weakness. In American Beauty, in The Usual Suspects, in House of Cards, he built characters who twisted morality into performance, and perhaps Tarantino thought that's all he ever did. For Tarantino, Kevin Spacey was proof that acting can become pathology, and charisma can disguise corruption. The performance never ended, because for him, it was never a performance at all. Jared Leto, method gone malignant.
To me, it means that people can kind of suspend reality for a bit and live with this character.
There's a thin line between method acting and manipulation. Tarantino drew that line years ago and said some actors crossed it for ego, not art. Jared Leto's reputation for tormenting co-stars in the name of method disgusted him. To Tarantino, it wasn't commitment. It was cruelty disguised as process. On set, Leto blurred ethics into performance, sending dead animals and cryptic gifts to colleagues. Tarantino, who thrives on theatrical violence, has zero tolerance for real harm, masquerading as creativity. Leto's defenders call it immersion. Tarantino calls it indulgence. He believes the camera should never justify the wound. In interviews, he's condemned actors who confuse suffering with storytelling. To him, Leto's Joker antics weren't avant-garde. They were adolescent. Theatrics without humanity. Art becomes exploitation when empathy disappears. And for Tarantino, that's where Leto crossed the line. If you have to hurt people to act, you're not acting, you're hiding. Behind the legend of method acting lies an old Hollywood myth. That cruelty equals depth. Tarantino, whose films explore violence with irony and intellect, sees it differently. His brutality is choreographed, never chaotic. Leto's chaos, by contrast, was real. Reports from the Suicide Squad set painted a picture of an actor using discomfort as dominance, mistaking shock for skill. Tarantino's disgust wasn't moral grandstanding, it was artistic. He said that true danger on screen doesn't come from tormenting others. It comes from honesty, timing, trust. Leto's version felt like theater for one. In Tarantino's philosophy, performance is sacred, but only when it respects the living. That's why Jared Leto, in his eyes, isn't just eccentric. He's a warning, proof that the pursuit of authenticity can curdle into cruelty when the camera stops rolling. Christian Bale, the genius who vanishes too far.
Then obsession kicks in, and he's certainly a very fascinating character.
Tarantino respects transformation, but he's wary of obsession. Christian Bale's legendary immersions, dropping weight, reshaping personality, bordered on self-erasure. Tarantino once called Bale a method actor who forgot he's a person. Reports of tirades on set and volatile perfectionism painted a portrait of brilliance that demanded collateral damage. For Tarantino, evil doesn't need intent. It only needs apathy toward the people who suffer in your wake. Bale's transformations are the stuff of legend, from the skeletal shadow in The Machinist to the swaggering brute of American Psycho and the stoic hero of The Dark Knight. His work is undeniable, but so is the wreckage left behind. Crew members have spoken of eruptions mid-scene, of an actor so consumed by precision he scorched anyone who broke the illusion. To Tarantino, that kind of immersion isn't devotion, it's destruction dressed as art. There's a point where discipline turns into cruelty, and sometimes you can't tell the difference. Tarantino has always believed performance should serve story, not ego. He once said he'd never hire someone who uses character as an excuse to stop being human. In Bale, he saw the duality he often writes about: genius chained to compulsion, empathy sacrificed for excellence. Bale's craft may border on transcendence, but Tarantino finds little glory in suffering that spreads beyond the frame. Perfectionism, Tarantino argues, is just control wearing a halo. And control, when it feeds on others, starts to look a lot like dominance. He respects Bale's brilliance but distrusts his process, the way he disappears so completely that those around him stop existing. For Tarantino, that's the quiet shape of evil in cinema. Not sadism, not vanity, but indifference. The moment when art forgets it's made by people. Shia LaBeouf, the prodigy who turned chaos into creed.
To be with me, she had to re-enter being a part of my life. She had to take a hit.
In another life, Tarantino might have loved Shia's raw nerve and commitment to danger. But what began as rebellion became self-immolation. LaBeouf's violence, addiction, and alleged abuse off-camera transformed him from enfant terrible to industry exile. Tarantino saw in him a warning. What happens when you confuse pain with authenticity? He was method acting life, one collaborator said. To Tarantino, that was the most dangerous performance of all. Tarantino has often said that chaos can be cinematic, but only when it's controlled. LaBeouf's chaos wasn't. It spilled beyond the lens. Street fights, arrests, and public meltdowns turned performance into pathology. For a filmmaker who choreographs violence like music, Tarantino viewed Shia's spiral as art without rhythm. If you can't turn it off, it's not art, it's illness. LaBeouf once described acting as bleeding truth until it hurts. Tarantino might have admired the sentiment if it weren't so literal. On screen, Shia radiated electricity. His work in Fury and Honey Boy showed rare courage, but off-screen that voltage burned everyone nearby. What Tarantino found tragic wasn't the destruction itself, but the confusion behind it. A man mistaking torment for truth, chaos for honesty. To Tarantino, the job of the artist is to play with fire without setting the room ablaze. Shia, he believes, lit the match and called the smoke art. There's genius in the impulse, but danger in the delusion. In the end, Tarantino doesn't see LaBeouf as evil in intent, but in effect. The harm wasn't premeditated, just unchecked. And to him, that's the real tragedy. When the performance consumes the performer and the audience keeps clapping. Alec Baldwin, the ego that refused accountability.
Well, I think that there's a criminal investigation. That could be a while.
For Tarantino, responsibility is sacred. Film sets are temples of trust. That's why the Rust tragedy, where a firearm handled by Alec Baldwin killed cinematographer Helena Hutchins, represented something unforgivable. Tarantino never commented publicly, but insiders close to him recall his fury at the negligence. Baldwin's decades-long reputation for volatility only deepened it. In Tarantino's code, accidents born of arrogance are worse than evil acts committed in fiction. Baldwin's history with anger was well known long before Rust. On sets and in interviews, he carried himself like a man convinced the rules applied to others, not him. Tarantino, who runs his own productions with near-military precision, believes safety and discipline are the invisible backbone of art. To him, a director or actor who breaks that trust doesn't just fail professionally, they commit a moral betrayal. A set is sacred. You don't play God where real people bleed. In Tarantino's world, cinematic violence is choreography, controlled chaos bound by respect. Real blood has no place in it. That's what made Rust so abhorrent to him, not just the loss of life, but the culture of carelessness that allowed it. Baldwin's insistence that he bore no responsibility clashed with Tarantino's core belief, that artists are accountable for everything within their frame. Insiders who've worked with Tarantino say the incident forced him to reflect on his own depictions of danger. He's known for pushing actors to emotional limits, but always within boundaries. The Rust disaster confirmed what he'd long feared, that Hollywood's arrogance had replaced craftsmanship. For Tarantino, Baldwin's tragedy wasn't just an accident, it was a symptom, a failure of humility, the cost of ego unrestrained. In cinema, death should only ever exist on screen. When it crosses into reality, it stops being art and becomes sin. Klaus Kinski, the devil cinema couldn't tame.
Crétin! Crétin! Vraiment crétin! Moi, je fais une fatigue de venir ici, tu comprends?
The last name on Tarantino's list isn't from Hollywood, but from its darker ancestry. Klaus Kinski, the German actor immortalized in Aguirre, The Wrath of God, was both genius and horror. His own daughter accused him of lifelong abuse. Directors feared him, co-stars loathed him, and Werner Herzog, his frequent collaborator, admitted he once plotted to kill him on set. Tarantino has cited Kinski as proof that art and evil often share the same room, and that brilliance, without empathy, curdles into monstrosity. To Tarantino, Kinski was the archetype of the corrupted artist, a man so consumed by ego he mistook cruelty for control. Kinski's performances, haunting, feral, unforgettable, were fueled not by creativity, but domination. Tarantino admired the energy but recoiled from the ethics. He once called Kinski the embodiment of what happens when performance becomes possession. Some actors summon demons for a scene. Kinski invited them to stay on set. Kinski was chaos incarnate, screaming at crew members, assaulting colleagues, breaking scenes in fits of rage. Herzog endured it for the sake of art, chaining his camera to madness itself. Tarantino, though, sees that relationship as Faustian. The question isn't whether Kinski was talented, it's whether any art is worth the suffering it demands from others. Tarantino has built his career on controlled anarchy, violence with a pulse, but never a victim. Kinski represented its mirror image, a man who blurred cruelty and creation until they were indistinguishable. In him, Tarantino saw both warning and mirror, the terrifying proof that genius, unchecked by empathy, becomes evil. In the end, Tarantino calls Kinski cinema's ghost, a reminder that some performances are too dark to celebrate, even if they burn forever on film. Evil in Hollywood doesn't always wear a mask. Sometimes it walks through studio gates smiling, holding a call sheet instead of a weapon. Tarantino's list isn't gossip, it's reflection. In his eyes, the greatest sin isn't violence, it's indifference. The arrogance that lets harm masquerade as genius. The silence that turns complicity into craft. Each name, from Weinstein's tyranny to Kinski's madness, proves that art without empathy becomes rot disguised as brilliance. Tarantino's lens has always captured brutality, but never without consequence. His stories bleed for truth, not applause. Hollywood will keep making heroes and villains, but Tarantino's revelation cuts through both. Fame can gild cruelty. Power can disguise evil. What lasts isn't their talent. It's the warning they leave behind. Because for Quentin Tarantino, evil isn't cinematic. It's ordinary. It's the smile that forgets its cost. Which story struck you most? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more untold Hollywood stories, subscribe for the next chapter in cinema's darker truth.